So, originally this video was going to be the final installment of what was basically my first impressions of the game, and also I was originally going to post this several days ago, but Boot Hill came out in Star Rail, so I had to pull him, and, So this is a 5-star guaranteed. Okay, this is it. Please, for the love of God, be Boot Hill. Boot Hill, Boot Hill, Boot Hill! Boot Hill, save me! 80. 81. No! No! God, why, Bronya? Why have you forsaken me? It did not go well. So then I had to scramble to get whatever free-to-play Stellar Jades were left on my account in a desperate attempt to get his light cone, which I did, so, go me. Anyway, since this is taking me longer than expected, this is going to be a longer video than I originally planned. I'm kind of turning this into just a full-on review of Wuthering Waves in its 1.0 state as a whole. I'm going to separate this video into 4 sections. First, we're going to go over the story as a whole, since I finished that, and we can talk about the ups and downs, the highs and lows of whatever this was. And then we'll go ahead and talk about the gameplay loop as a whole, all the good things there, and then we'll talk about the long-term grind, kind of peek forward towards the end game and what that might look like, and finally, we're actually going to discuss Kuro Games, because there has been a lot of things that have surrounded them with the launch of this game, and that's putting it lightly. There's good and bad to talk about with that, but we'll jump into that a little bit later on. So if you remember my first video, I was not very kind to the story and the English voiceover, and these were pretty common sentiments from the community, and while I do think the story picked up in the second half, I'm not going to overlook its shortcomings, because it's bad. At parts, it's just bad, and that needs to be pointed out. Part of the plot just feels boring, bland, and hard to follow with a whole bunch of terms and jargon that the game barely bothers explaining. That combined with some lackluster voiceovers makes the narrative not super worth investing into, especially early on. That being said, the whole voice performance isn't the problem because some of the characters are actually pretty good. I found that Alto, Encore, and my future wife Camellia...
Bingo! I'm one of the bloom bearers of the Black Shores.
Okay, cool.
This Blake bloom is our symbol. It represents our mission to save the world.
Well, that sounds nice.
That's what it says in the rules, at least. Our plans. What is it again?
Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Like, she's really cute. That's what I was gonna say earlier.
You're a very special seed. That I'm very sure.
I got a very special seed for... Had good performances, and they were a big reason of why I think Act 5 of the story is actually the best part so far. Act 6 is pretty good, but we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. There are absolutely problems with the English voiceover, but they don't apply to the whole cast. Unfortunately, Yang Yang is the worst offender when it comes to flat, uninspired voice work, which sucks, because she has the most spoken lines in the 1.0 version of the game. Kuro Games actually talked about the English voiceover and kind of blamed part of the issue on the fact they used an agency based in the UK for the voiceover, but didn't want any of the main characters to sound English. You may have noticed that a lot of the random background NPCs might sound British, and occasionally you'll just randomly find some soldier that'll be like, "Oh, hey, how's it going, Rover? I'm feeling pretty good today, am I?"
Is that so? Great. We know how important this cannon is. We kept it safe. Never let them have it. This reparation key. Take it. I may not see our victory in person. But please, please defeat that monster. For us. Thank you.
Yes, we will win. Please, rest in peace.
Just talk about random stuff in a British accent, I don't know. And while this does seem like a strange decision to, hire a British agency and then not want anything to be British, it doesn't really make me understand why a lot of the performances are just bad and flat and don't sound good. Because even if Yang Yang sounded like, she was using a British accent, which I do assume she's a British voice actress, it wouldn't do anything. Like, she would still sound bad. Instead of going, "Hey Rover, I'm Yang Yang. I have no personality or emotion." And instead it would just sound like, "Hey Rover, I'm Yang Yang. I have no personality or emotion." Like, being British and not having a personality doesn't sound that much different from being not British and not having a personality. I really think it was a direction problem and not just the fact that they weren't using their, native accents. I mean, actors and voice actors have used different accents than the one they use when they talk all the time. It's pretty common. So it's not as if this is some random thing that has never happened before. I really think it's more of a direction problem. I really do think a lot of the voice actors were just given lines and not told anything about the context of them, and were just told, like, "Hey, say this." So they did. They didn't say it with any particular inflection or any particular tone. They just said it. And once again, this is not the entire cast. It is a few of the voices, but the problem is that the most prominent voice in the game so far is by far the worst. And that is really the problem with the voiceover as a whole. Like I said, there are plenty of characters who I really enjoyed. We talked about Scar, who has a pretty good voice. I think Alto, Encore, Camellia, and a lot of these other characters have pretty good, or at least okay, voiceover work, so I don't think it's really that big of an issue. It's just a big issue when it comes to the fact that some of the most prominent characters in the game don't have good voice work. Now, voice work aside, I did say that I liked the story itself in 5 and 6, though I do think parts of Act 6 do drag on a little bit longer than they should, and the conclusion has some cool visuals and moments, but when judging the story as a whole, it's hard to not acknowledge that a very weak and sometimes downright painful beginning really hurts the narrative as a whole. If I was going to give the story a rating out of 10 at this point, I'd probably give it a 5. That's probably being a bit generous. Not giving it a 4 only because they at least acknowledged some of the problems with it, so that kind of means that hopefully it'll be better going forward. It's probably more of a 4, but I'm going to give it a 5. I don't know why I'm saying I'm going to give it a 5. I'm not actually scoring any of these elements, but the point is, the story as a whole has its ups and downs, really shakes out to be kind of mid at best, so it's definitely not a high point, but it's not as low of a point as I thought it would be from the first few chapters of the story. Alright, time for the good old gameplay loop. Like I said in the last video, the combat's really fun. It's not too complex, though if you really dive into animation and swamp canceling, it definitely can be. But regardless, it feels satisfying, and it's overall just a fun experience when running around the world, farming echoes, and killing monsters. The roster is, of course, pretty limited right now, but as with all of these games, the roster is going to get real big, real fast. Please release Camellia Kuro. I need her to be in the game. Anyway, even looking at the pretty limited starting roster, you have a solid handful of different options for DPS units to use, and while Verena is basically the best in slot support for every team, even she has other options you could use instead with characters like Baija as well. So, the roster, not super big right now. That's not going to be a problem for very long. They're going to pump out a bunch of characters because that's how these games make money in the first place, so don't have to worry about that. The rest of this section is really just stuff I've said before. The combat is fun, the boss fights feel great, and the puzzles and exploration, while not being anything groundbreaking, are interesting and varied enough to keep everything from feeling too samey so far, and even if things do start to feel a little bland or a little samey, it's fine because the combat itself, at its core, is fun. So even if you're just killing enemies to open a chest, that's still pretty fun. It's not perfect, it's not revolutionary, it's not genre-defining or anything, but it's good. And hey, good gameplay is pretty important. Now, gacha games, aside from being, literal casinos, are also at their core resource management games, especially when you aren't dumping the GDP of a small nation into buffing your account. The grind is actually a super important aspect of the game because it is for all gacha games, and after reaching Union level 30, you really reach your first big progression wall. Doing dailies, the main quest, a decent amount of exploration will get you up to 30 pretty smoothly and pretty quickly, but from 30 to 40 is really the first real wall you're going to run into. You need around 56,000 experience to get from level 1 to level 30, and like 80-something thousand to get from level 30 to level 40. And you have to also think about the fact that you're going to burn through most of the big sources of account experience getting to level 30. The main quest, some of the big exploration things you're going to do, the exploration quests themselves that change some of the areas. You might have even done the companion quests that are big chunks of XP and some of the side quests as well. So when you're going from 30 to 40, a lot of that XP is just going to come from doing your dailies and spending your wave plates. So it really is going to be a bit of a, time sink to get from 30 to 40, so that's really where we have to talk about the grind for the game really beginning. And one of the most important parts of the daily grind is, of course, how you spend your time-gated currency, which in this game is called wave plates, whatever that means. You'll be spending them mostly on boss drops for leveling characters early on, but once we have most of our units that we're actually using built, and we farm the talent and weapon materials for their weapons, the main use of your wave plates is most likely going to be tacit fields, and that's mostly what you're going to be doing in the end game as well. These are kind of the equivalent of artifact or relic domains, but they're also a fair bit different, since unlike in games like Star Rail and Genshin, you can get end-game quality echoes from the overworld. So then why are you farming the tacit fields? Well, it's because you have a very limited amount of the XP and the materials you need to unlock substats for your echoes. So while you are farming echoes when you're farming tacit fields, you're mostly farming tacit fields to get the echo XP and the tuners that help you unlock substats. That being said, once again, you are still getting echoes from these, so you could get some good echoes to work with while getting the XP materials. Now, I do think this is a better system than the relic and artifact system, because yes, you have to farm for the experience points, but at the very least, you can farm the actual items for free, the actual echoes themselves, which means you can find the echoes with the right main stats, and then only level those ones up, instead of having to spend days just to get the right one from the tacit fields, which makes it a little bit more forgiving. That being said, of course, you do still have to spend your wave plates on tacit fields if you want to get enough XP to level up a bunch of different echoes for different characters, or level up different echoes because you're trying to upgrade the echoes you already have on characters. Like, maybe you have a decent 5-star echo on your Danjin, but you want to get a better one that has like double crit, so then you're going to level up another one of those. But once again, you're going to have to farm more tacit fields so you can get more echo XP, so you can unlock the ability to level up even more echoes. So once again, it's pretty similar. You're going to be grinding endgame gear essentially the same way you would be doing in any of these other games. It's just you're really farming for the materials to upgrade that gear as opposed to farming for the gear itself, which is good because it makes it just slightly more forgiving. So the grind for the game really does start at level 30. Of course, the Union level goes all the way to level 80, so that's going to be a long time from now. I mean, I don't even know how we're going to get to level 80, honestly, if we're stuck at level 30 for so long. My account is level 34 right now, and I think if you're free to play and you're playing every day, you could probably be like level 35, 36, 30, maybe 37 right now, I don't know, but you definitely can't be level 40 yet, so we're going to be in the 30s for a good while. Even if you've been playing every day since launch, you're going to be in the 30s for a good long time, but eventually we will get to 40, and then we get to wait for a long time until we get to 50, so we can get even more rewards, because that's fun, am I right? But anyway, just taking an honest look at the grind and the system as a whole, I do think it's fine. There's nothing offensive about it, there's nothing wrong, and they are actually even changing tacit fields a bit because they're going to be increasing the amount of echo XP you get from them, as well as also removing the little annoying animation that plays when you clear a tacit field just so you can farm them a little faster now. So that's good, improving that is definitely a plus, I guess. Speaking of things that Kuro is doing to improve the game, we do have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Kuro Games themselves. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this a review of the game, not the company? And yes, it definitely is. However, we have to talk about everything that has gone right and wrong for Kuro Games. Now, before I start bad-mouthing Kuro a bit, it's worth mentioning that they have at least acknowledged a bunch of their blunders, which I know is a low bar, but to be fair, it's a low bar that many game companies still refuse to clear by refusing to admit when they've made a mistake. And they've also been quick to offer compensation in the form of everything from premium currency to a free standard 5-star. Now, while it would still be better if Kuro didn't make a myriad of errors in the first place, acknowledging them and trying to pay us back for them is a good sign at least. Now, let's talk about a few issues. I won't name every single less than ideal thing that has happened early on because I don't feel like just piling on negativity, but I'll name a few. Of course, there have been a bunch of general bugs, performance issues, and poor optimization things that have affected some people more than others, and these are the kind of things that are common with major releases, especially major online releases that have a bunch of different servers and stuff like that, aren't just, self-contained single-player experiences. So it's to be expected that there's going to be, some bumps along the road. Now, some people have only had a few issues. I haven't really had very many issues. Like, I've had a couple random bugs here and there. Like, there was this one time where I logged in and then couldn't aim in with any of the gun characters for like a couple hours. I had to log out of the game, completely restart it, but random stuff like that happens. There's some performance issues, stuff like that, but for the most part, that's just something that happens. You have to accept that, especially with big releases. It'd be nice if things were never buggy, but That's just not how things are, and it is what it is. Now, we have already touched on the way they dealt with the localization process and how less than ideal that turned out, but once again, they do admit that they might have messed up when it comes to the localization process and how they went about it, so once again, admitting fault, very low bar, but at least it's something that they are doing. The same thing with the bugs, they're admitting fault, they're compensating people for it, that's very good. Now the problem is, sometimes you try to compensate players, and then you end up messing up even more when trying to compensate them. And by that I mean, it's time to talk about Gion's weapon, which is kind of funny, but also really kind of stupid. Now nothing's wrong with the weapon itself, but the description of the weapon was translated wrong in Japanese, giving it a totally different trigger for its passive buff, which is obviously an issue because that means players are pulling for a weapon without actually knowing what the weapon really does. And this isn't just some random weapon you can get off the 4-star weapons, you know. It is a 5-star weapon, and it is the premium limited 5-star weapon, which means if one weapon was going to have a bad description, this was the worst weapon it could have been. So Kuro obviously acknowledged that this was an issue, they fixed the translation, and they even said people could reach out to them for compensation if they were affected by this, like you pulled for the weapon and you didn't know what it did, and now you want, you know, some kind of recompense for that. And, Kuro friggin' doxed them? Okay, they didn't actually dox them, okay? But they did leak all of their emails because they are not good at their jobs sometimes. Yeah, so basically all the Japanese players that emailed them about getting compensation for the scandal with Gion's weapon got their email addresses leaked, which is not great. So even if the company is apologetic about its problems, if the company turns out to just be incompetent, that is gonna be a long-term issue. Because, you know, if you can't even respond to emails properly, I'm not sure I can trust you to support a game long-term. It's not all bad, though, because everyone affected by the data leak is getting... Oh, wait, is this real? Amazon gift cards? What the fuck do you mean Amazon gift cards? You just have these lying around the office? Why are you giving them This isn't even like an in-game reward. Amazon gift cards, really? That's what we're doing? Anyway, Amazon gift cards aside, in the post that I mentioned earlier where they talked about improving tacit fields and giving more Echo XP, they did also mention a bunch of other stuff, like giving away in-game credits, weapon banner and limited banner pulls, and even a whole bunch of wave plate refills. They also said they're pushing for the release date of the second premium 5-star, Yinlin, and also the release of the 1.1 patch, which is kind of unexpected because you would think a company facing this many random issues would be more likely to push a major patch back instead of forward, but they apparently want to push this patch forward to get more content out and give the game some other improvements, so I guess that's a good thing, you know, honestly. Like, the problem is, do we trust them to not fuck this up too, right? Because not doxing your players would probably be a good thing, you know, a pretty simple thing to do, but they couldn't even do that, so I don't know. All in all, it would be being far too kind to call Kuro Games anything other than at least error-prone at this point. But on the other hand, they're at least putting forth an effort to compensate players for their problems, and at least seemingly attempting to acknowledge those problems and fix them, which I know is a low bar, but as I stated before, is a bar that a lot of people in the industry fail to get over, because so many times game companies put out terrible products and then refuse to acknowledge the fact that they messed up, or will just blame the player base for not liking their product. I just can't be confident that there won't be any major problems in the future, but hey, I guess that just means that we get more free stuff, right? I just don't want them to dox me and then give me like a friggin' Subway gift card as compensation. So in the end, talking about Kuro Games' potential incompetence, but at least willingness to admit their own faults, talking about the gameplay loop, the daily grind, and the story and narrative, warts and all, is Wuthering Waves a good game? Because I think that was kind of what we set out to discuss even when I started the First Impressions kind of miniseries. So, is Wuthering Waves a good game? I would say the best way to put it is that it's an unpolished game with promising gameplay and good systems to build on. As long as Kuro can stop kicking themselves in the dick, I think this could be a good game going forward. That's my verdict, at least for now. This was probably also the most time I've sunk into a video. Like, I didn't write a script per se, but I did write down like even bullet points and stuff, which is more than I did for the last couple of videos. So I'd love to hear what you guys thought about it and what you think about the game so far in general. I'm going to keep playing, at least until Camellia comes out.